Everyone, welcome back. Hope everyone's doing well. Today we are going to talk about culture. And it kind of is a little starting point from where we left off yesterday. I kind of talked about how there's different cultural norms, such as shaking hands in the United States versus a greeting like le bis in France with a kiss. So we're going to break down and talk all about kind of these cultural differences today because it's socio-cultural psychology. So first, let's break down what is culture. So culture is just the enduring behaviors, ideas, attitudes, values, and traditions shared by a group of people that are transmitted from one generation to the next. So this doesn't mean that necessarily that everyone in a country shares the same culture. You could have various cultures living within a country. So country isn't the same as culture. Culture is more kind of like your beliefs and traditions that you share. So, what I asked you guys to do at the beginning of this for your questions was to identify 10 statements, 10 I am statements. And this is actually something known in psychology as the 10 statement task. So, you had to complete the statement I am blank 10 times. And this is kind of a little trick to assess whether you are a part of an individualistic or a collectivist culture. So let's check it out real quick. We know that individualistic cultures are very me oriented, and you really want to stand out and be unique. Whereas collectivists are very much the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. You want to do for the group and benefit the group more so than yourself. So in the 10 statement task, if your I am statements were kind of personal trait adjective focused, something like I am short, I am funny, I'm smart, I'm kind, then you might be more individualistic. If you have more relational phrases that you wrote down, such as I am a brother, I am a daughter, I am a child, I am a niece, whatever. So if they're more relational in who you are in connection with others, then you might be more collectivist. Typically, what we find is most people, and I've done this in my other psych classes, most people are going to be more in this individualistic category. And that's because the United States is heavily individualistic. If you think back to US history, we're very much that pull ourselves up by the bootstrap mentality. You think back to the Boston Tea Party, in which we're trying to take a stand and be our own country. We want to be our own person. That's very individualistic. Whereas collectivist cultures, we're going to talk about those in a second, would be more relational, typically more Asian countries where the group is the big focus. So individualistic cultures value achievement, uniqueness, difference, and independence is the big one. And you define yourself based on the personal traits, like I just mentioned. So some examples of these would be the United States, big one. And we're going to talk about this with coronavirus, that the United States has such difficulty kind of being told by the government what to do, thinking of our history of, we don't want to be told by a king what to do. We're very individualistic and don't like to be kind of told what to do as a group. So United States is a big one. Australia, Britain, Germany, these are some more individualistic cultures, where it's more focused on yourself and being unique and different. Typically Western cultures, basically. Then collectivist cultures, again, nail that sticks out gets hammered down. They value social harmony, tradition, interdependence, so relations with one another. And this social harmony piece is really important. You don't want to be that person who brings dishonor on your culture or family, so you really want to mesh and do things for the betterment of your family, culture, society, etc. So again, you're seeing yourself as very connected with others. You don't really see yourself as an individual. It's more who you are in relation to the people around you and your family and society. So Korea, Japan, China is the really big one. when it comes to collectivist cultures. And we just talked about the Asch line conformity study yesterday. So this guy, actually a psychologist by the name of Barry, kind of took the Asch study and applied it to different cultures. And remember, I said the major limitation of really any psychological research is that typically it's done in a lab at a university, and it's often white, male college students. And if they are, we're getting better at using women, but really there's issues when it comes to applying it cross-culturally. So Barry was like, let's see how the Asch line study applies and holds up in another culture. Will they be as likely to conform? It was done in the United States with an individualistic culture. So what about collectivist cultures? So they set it up kind of the same way, but instead of you being in a group of people with the Confederates pretending to say the answer that's wrong or whatever, the person was by themselves. So what happens is they walk in the room by themselves. There's just them and the experimenter. And the experimenter shows them the lines, same deal, and says, okay, so which one best represents the line on photograph 1? And what we see is that when the experimenter tells them, oh, everyone in your culture or most people in your culture said line C is the best fit, and that's the wrong one, they're more likely to go along and say that. So what we see, they used a collectivist culture, the Temne, and they found that people in culture conformed more when they were told that other Temne believed that that was the line, when obviously it wasn't. So again, you see here that this pressure for social harmony, you don't want to let your culture down, even though you know that this is the wrong line and no one else is there doing it. But just that idea of wanting to be in unison with your culture was very important. And if you want to watch a video, this kind of talks about it. So individualism versus collectivism is kind of the one really, really main one that we hear about of the Hofstede cultural dimensions. So Hofstede is a cultural psychologist who did a lot of research in identifying different ways that cultures are different from one another, basically. So he kind of set up a little experiment in which he sent out questionnaires to employees from IBM, which is a multinational company. So they have workplaces in all these different countries all over the world that are in, all sorts of different cultures. So what he realized is that these cultures do vary in really important and unique ways. And these differences, he called them cultural dimensions. So individualism versus collectivism is one cultural dimension, but we're going to bring up a couple other ones. And cultural psychology is actually a whole field. It's quite interesting. So you'll bring in a cultural psychologist in something like one of these multinational companies to try and consult and say, okay, so we got people from different cultures in here. How can we kind of work together despite our differences and kind of use them as assets? So it's pretty interesting. So cultural dimensions, again, are just values within a culture that influence behavior and cognition, kind of the differences between the countries in these, or cultures in these. So another cultural dimension is power distance. So this power distance is the extent to which a culture respects authority and status. If you're very low power distance, kind of like the United States in a way, you're more democratic and you don't really want to follow one head honcho. You want power to be kind of split amongst the people. Cultures in a high power distance, cultural dimension, are more paternalistic or have really follow like one authority figure. And then uncertainty avoidance is another one. So this is kind of the extent to which individuals in a culture see unknown situations as kind of threatening or challenging. People who have high uncertainty avoidance, they really like tradition, familiarity, rules, so they don't like change. They're not. They probably wouldn't score high on kind of the openness part of the Big Five. of our ocean. So if you're lower in uncertainty avoidance, you're much more open to change and that kind of a thing. So high uncertainty avoidance, you have a lot of structures in place and preparations for the unknown because you don't like change. Femininity versus masculinity. So if you are a more masculine society, there's a high focus on achievement, competition, and wealth, whereas feminine societies would be more about cooperations, relationships, having an overall quality of life. So you can kind of think about the United States and where we'd fall in these different cultural dimensions. Just now thinking about it myself, I'd say, in the United States, we're very achievement, competition oriented. So we might be more of a masculine society. And you guys will get to do a little bit of research on the Hofstede website for different countries. And then long-term versus short-term orientation is another one. So this is the connection to the past and your attitude to the future. So if you have a short-term orientation, you're much more into traditions and thinking in the here and now or more in the past. Whereas if you have a long-term orientation, again, you're thinking of the future. You're more likely to plan ahead and think 5 steps ahead into the future. So what we're going to do today is you guys are going to fill out a little worksheet in which you're assessing some different countries. You're going to compare the United States and Taiwan in their approach to the COVID-19 pandemic and how, because of our different cultural dimensions, we might be approaching it differently as a society. So it'll be interesting. You guys are going to look up and see how the United States and Taiwan falls in these different dimensions. And then look and see, I've posted a little article just to kind of talk about the differences and how we responded. Obviously, we're a different size country too, so that also plays a role. And we have other unique things that attribute to what we're doing. But just kind of an interesting thing to think about how countries are responding differently. And when Ed talked with us last Friday from Marquette, we were like, how can we rebrand this stay-at-home order? How can we rebrand kind of like a lockdown mentality? How can you rebrand this to fit a culture in which we don't like to hear that kind of thing? It's hard and it is kind of anxiety-provoking. So what you guys are going to do then is try and rebrand this idea of stay at home, etc., safer at home. Try and rebrand it and sell it towards an individualistic culture, and then rebrand it and sell it towards a more collectivist culture. I'll attach an article that I read that was pretty interesting that talked about, again, Australia is much more individualistic, and their whole national slogan was, we're all in this together. And they're talking about how that didn't quite work because that's much more of a collectivist slogan rather than an individualistic slogan. So I'd like to see what ideas you guys can come up with, design your own little poster, and be pretty interesting. All right. Have a great day, everyone.